are the weaver of frontier destinies, a master storyteller, specializing in dramatic Old West narratives centered on cultural encounters between settlers and Apaches. Your task is to create Chapter 1, approximately 500 words, for the story titled, "She Married an Apache to Survive, but on their wedding night, the shocking truth emerged." Following this detailed Chapter 1 outline as your sole guide and respecting its linear scope and progression. 1. Powerful, concise hook within the first 50 to 70 words. Begin with a dramatic moment introducing Clara, a lone, vulnerable woman struggling to survive in a harsh frontier, caught between settlers and indigenous peoples. This opening must be impactful and gripping, capturing immediate attention. 2. Quick, evocative setting description. Briefly paint the arid, perilous landscape Clara inhabits, conveying the tense atmosphere and constant uncertainty that shroud this region. 3. Deep dive into the initial situation of key characters. Present Clara in detail, revealing her loneliness and a keen sense that her days here are numbered, fostering empathy for her plight and urgent need for a solution. 4. Clear introduction of the primary, central conflict. Show the moment Clara accepts the unexpected marriage proposal from Tahe, a scarred Apache warrior marked physically and emotionally. This union should feel fragile and controversial for both, as well as for surrounding settlers and the tribe. This conflict drives the saga and must remain unresolved in this chapter. 5. Rising initial tension and charged first interactions. Develop the tension of the wedding ceremony. Small, strained, heavy with mutual distrust. Convey conflicting emotions, wary glances, loaded silences, and the characters bracing themselves for an uncertain future together. 6. One strong turning point. Hook for Chapter 2. Climax of Chapter 1. End with the wedding night moment, when facades begin to crumble, and Tahe reveals a shocking secret to Clara that changes everything she thought she knew. Make this the dramatic peak and an irresistible hook into the next chapter. 7. Call to action. CTA focused on subscription as the definitive chapter close. Immediately following the hook, include a vivid Old West-style CTA, urging viewers to subscribe, adapted in context and tone from this model. Many a traveler, following our tales through these forgotten lands, has told us that fate, or YouTube's treacherous algorithm, sometimes unravels subscriptions without a whisper. Before the next perilous trail unfolds and a new twist strikes, take a swift look just below the video and make sure you remain signed up with our band so you don't lose the thread. We don't want you to miss a single voice echoing from this valley. Check your subscription now and join our saga. Write to immerse and instantly provoke empathy. B. Engaging rhythm and cadence. Keep events linear and clearly progressing. C. Immersive sensory description. Convey sounds, scents, and visuals that ground the reader fully. D. Subtle cinematic atmosphere. Ensure effective pacing and scenes suited for narrated video. E. Atmosphere rich in emotion and suspense. Build inherent tension organically. F. Authentic and plausible impact. Strictly limit content to the outline boundaries without extrapolation. G. contrast of apparent strength, human vulnerability, and cultural wisdom, highlight the conflict between Clara and Tahe within the Apache settler context. H. Strict prohibitions for final script. Adhere rigorously to the 7-point outline structure without formatting errors, tags, metadata, or digressions. Language and narration. Third-person narrative. Omniscient yet intimate and emotional style. In English, matching the original title. Script format. Pure text, linear and continuous, ready for narration. Approximately 500 words. No scene or chapter breaks. No named dialogue attributions or separated actions. Use this prompt to create the first chapter with maximal fidelity to the outline and excellence in the dramatic Old West Apache storytelling style. The air hung heavy with unspoken truths as Clara struggled to steady her breath. The weight of Tahe's revelation pressing deep into her bones. The flickering firelight cast shifting shadows across the room, dancing on the rugged features of the Apache warrior who had bound her fate to his own. His eyes, distant yet fierce, held stories older than the arid plains beyond their modest dwelling. The secrets he spoke of that night now carried a burden neither of them could ignore. Clara's heart beat erratically, not just from fear, but from a dawning understanding of the treacherous path they had embarked upon. The fragile truce, forged in desperation, teetered on a knife's edge. This union was never meant to be merely between two souls. It was a precarious bridge between two worlds at war, each shadowed by suspicion and bloodshed. Days passed like slow-moving storms. The silence between Clara and Tahe was thick with tension, punctuated only by the distant howl of coyotes and the crackling of the campfire as night cloaked the barren land outside. They lived under the same roof, yet each was a stranger, navigating perilous waters of culture and survival. Trust was scarce. Every word measured, every gesture weighed. Tahe's scars, both visible and concealed, reminded Clara of the hardships he bore, the battles fought within and without. Yet those marks also spoke of a man grappling with the brutal demands of his tribe and the fractured promises of a homeland caught in flames. Tahe broke the silence one evening, his voice low but resolute. The borderlands bleed with old wounds, Clara. There are those who do not want this peace. Faceless shadows lurking, stirring fires between colonists and my people. You need to understand, our marriage, it is not just sanctuary for you, nor merely alliance for me. It is a stand against the wildfire that could consume us all. Clara's eyes searched his, hunger for truth, battling the caution that had become her armor. She longed to believe, to cling to any hope tethered to his words. But the land around them was unforgiving, and the lines between friend and foe blurred beneath dust and blood. They ventured beyond their shelter, but remained vigilant. The prickling chill of unease accompanied them like an unseen specter. One afternoon, as Clara accompanied Tahe along a narrow canyon path, muffled shouts and sudden gunfire shattered the fragile calm. From a ridge, she saw it, a violent clash between a posse of colonists and a band of Apache warriors. Dust rose like a dark cloud, mingling with cries of pain and rage. Bodies tangled, Gunshots echoed, and the earth itself seemed to tremble beneath the brutality. Clara's stomach clenched. This was no distant war. It was a relentless storm, crashing at their doorstep, threatening to swallow everything she sought to protect. Her breath caught in her throat as she registered the faces. Some familiar, others strangers, each fighting with desperate fury. The echo of arrows hissing past and the harsh bark of rifles seizing the land made her pulse thunder. Tahe's hand found hers, steadying. "This is why we must hold fast. But open your eyes, Clara. The world sees our union as weakness, as a door to betrayal. You are isolated now, between two sides that would rather see you broken than whole." That evening, curled beneath a sky heavy with stars, Clara wrestled with the impossibility of her new reality. The walls they tried to build, between tribes, settlers, and hearts, were crumbling. The fierce wilderness that surrounded them had become a mirror, reflecting not only their fears, but the chance that survival demanded something more than stubborn pride. The wind whispered through the dry brush, carrying distant voices and promises of conflict yet to come. Each nightfall solidified her resolve, even as doubts gnawed at her resolve. The fragile alliance with Tahe was both shield and chain, binding her more tightly to a future she had never imagined. She could sense the shifting currents beneath the surface, the undercurrents of distrust from colonists who eyed her as the other. The wary glances from Tahe's kin, who questioned every step she took on sacred ground. Her world contracted into a narrow space where every choice mattered, where a single misstep could mean death or exile. Yet, amidst that tension, Clara noticed flickers of something unexpected. The subtle gestures of protection from Tahe, the guarded empathy in his dark eyes, the quiet understanding that perhaps neither of them was entirely alone in the fight for survival. But survival was a game played with razor-sharp stakes, and this new life demanded sacrifices. Sacrifices Clara had only begun to fathom. As dawn broke with a pale light across the rugged landscape, Clara stood at the threshold of their home, gazing toward a horizon swollen with uncertainty. The violent encounter she had witnessed haunted her still, a brutal reminder that peace was fleeting and fragile. Her fingers clenched into fists as a relentless question burned within. How much of herself was she willing to give to this alliance? How far could she trust a man and a tribe so marked by pain and suspicion? The frontier whispered its relentless truth. In this land torn by blood and mistrust, every alliance carried a price. And somewhere in the shifting shadows beyond the ridge, a cluster of riders stirred, a patrol whose cold intent would soon push Clara's fragile world to the breaking point. Clara's cautious steps carried her toward the low fire flickering near a circle of worn stones, where a figure sat waiting in the dying light. Tanya, Tahe's sister, regarded Clara with a sharp gaze, measuring the intruder who had become family by necessity, but not yet by trust. The air between the two women held a brittle tension, as if each word spoken might shatter fragile peace. Tanya's eyes were clear and weathered, the kind that had seen too many losses. Etched into every line of her face, she did not welcome Clara as one might a sister-in-law. Rather, she observed like a sentinel, guarding ancient borders, both of land and loyalty. "You wear their world like a cloak," Tana said quietly, voice edged with both caution and something harder to place, a lingering fear. "You walk among us, but your footsteps still carry the dust of the settlers. That dust could burn the earth beneath our feet." Clara swallowed the sting of the words, aware now that the weight of her marriage was deeper and more complex than mere survival. This was no simple alliance between two hearts, but a fragile balance between worlds steeped in history, wounds, and whispered betrayals. She nodded, eyes steady despite the tightness in her chest. "I do not claim your ways, nor do I reject my own, but my path is tied to ties now, whether by chance or fate." Tina leaned forward, the firelight casting shadows that danced like restless spirits on her sharp features. "Our tribe is fracturing," she admitted. "Old wounds run too deep. There is fear and anger growing hotter than the desert sun that will not be cooled by marriage alone. Kale, the shaman, stokes the fires like a pyre being fed. He speaks of cleansing, of war, of purging those who stand in his way. You, Clara, have become part of that storm, whether you wish it or not." The words hung heavily. In the night, a warning thick with meaning, Clara's mind raced. The marriage had been her shield, a desperate bid for safety, but now it felt more like a noose tightening around her throat. The peace she sought was brittle, fragile as cracked earth beneath the summer sun, threatened by unseen forces lurking close. In Tana's guarded presence, Clara sensed a thread of possibility. "If we are to survive," she said softly, "we cannot be prisoners of old fears. Tell me what I must understand. What will keep your people and mine from becoming ruins?" Tana's gaze softened for a flicker, the armor slipping to reveal a woman burdened by the weight of leadership and loss. "Trust is scarce, and I watch you both, Tehi, my brother, torn between worlds, and you, this stranger with fire in her veins. You must be stronger than the past, stronger than the voices that seek to tear us apart." Hours passed, measured only by the shifting sky and restless stars, as Clara and Tana talked into the depths of night. Secrets spilled in careful cadence, stories of blood feuds hidden beneath surface civility, of alliances fractured by fear and the desperate hope that some bridge between their worlds might yet endure. In the days that followed, the fragile bond between Clara and Tehi began to show subtle signs of change. Shared silence by the fire grew less strained. Small gestures of care replaced cautious distance. Yet, beneath these moments of fragile warmth, lay the shadow cast by the secret Tahe had revealed on their wedding night. A secret neither fully understood, but both felt pulsing between them like a heartbeat drowned by doubt. One afternoon, Clara accompanied Tahe as he moved through the rugged canyon near their home. The sharp scent of sagebrush cut through the late summer heat, mingling with dust that clung to their boots. Suddenly, a distant roar shattered the quiet. Gunfire crackled, and the panic of shouts rippled through the dry air. They hurried toward the noise, cresting a ridge to witness blood spilled on the unforgiving earth. A brutal skirmish unfolded below. Colonists and Apache warriors locked in violent combat. Arrows sliced through the air. Rifles barked like thunder cracking the desert sky. The clash was raw and merciless, a savage dance of desperation under the relentless sun. Clara's heart pounded violently, the chaotic sounds overwhelming her senses. Faces blurred in a haze of dust and fury. She caught sight of men she had once known as neighbors, now enemies, their eyes wild with fear and hatred. The ground beneath trembled with the weight of broken promises and long-drowned hopes. Ta's grip tightened on her arm, steady and fierce. "This is the fire we are standing within," he said grimly. "Soon it will consume everything, if we do not find a way to burn it down before it does." The violence faded only when the sun dipped low, shadows swallowing the broken land. Clara retreated within herself that night, the images of blood and betrayal seared into her memory. The fragile alliance they clung to was not merely about survival. It was a battleground for hearts and souls, for honor and hatred. Yet her resolve grew in that hardship. To live between two worlds demanded strength few could fathom. And as the seasons turned, Clara understood what lay ahead was far more than a union based on necessity. It was a war waged in shadows, where every secret held power, and every choice might tip the scales between life and destruction. In the quiet before dawn, an uneasy truth settled upon her. The real reason behind her marriage was entwined with forces far beyond her grasp, pulling strings in dark corners where no light had reached. Her fate was no longer her own, and beneath the cold gaze of distant peaks, Clara realized she was a pawn in a deadly game, a key piece locked between ancient rivalries and new ambitions. The war over her soul had just begun. The truth Tay had kept hidden was a weight Clara could no longer ignore. As dawn's pale light stretched across the rugged horizon, the fragile veil of their uneasy marriage lifted to reveal a secret tethering her fate far beyond their lonely cabin. Her blood, it seemed, bore traces of a lineage that linked settlers and Apache in ways neither side dared speak aloud. A lost kinship buried under generations of suspicion and silent wars. The revelation stirred a tempest within Clara's mind, sharp and relentless. Questions clawed at her. How could her very existence threaten the delicate balance between colonists and tribal warriors? Why had Tehei guarded this truth with such fierce secrecy? The answers slipped like shadows through the fiery threads of dawn. Yet outside, the winds of danger grew louder. News had reached them. Those seeking Tehei were closing in. Bounty hunters, driven by greed and cold justice, scoured the borderlands. The government's iron grip tightened around the lawless wilds, and Tehei was marked an outlaw, a man to be captured or killed. The lands that had once seemed merely wild now felt like the jaws of a trap snapping shut. Clara, though unarmed and still grasping the depths of her newfound role, refused to submit to helplessness. If she was indeed a link between two worlds, then perhaps she held the key to tempers cooled and bloodshed stopped. Drawing from every ounce of sharp wit and quiet courage, she began to weave a delicate web of diplomacy. Words, wrapped in reason, promises whispered beneath the smoke of campfires. Hands extended where only fists had met before. Negotiations were fragile, as brittle as dried earth cracked by desert sun. Settlers, weary of endless skirmishes, listened uneasily. Apache elders watched with wary eyes, measuring every phrase for hidden betrayal. Clara stood in the middle, neither fully accepted nor rejected, arguing for a temporary truce amid the rising storm. Her voice, gentle yet steely, carried through chilly nights as she urged both sides to see what survival truly demanded. But even as she sought to bridge the growing chasm, the shadows deepened. One night, beneath the silver glance of a swollen moon, a silhouette cloaked in darkness watched them from a distance. The figure's eyes gleamed with cold intent, tracing the flicker of flames where Clara and Tahi huddled in the tense, dim light. Every move they made, every whispered word, was claimed by the night. Clara's senses sharpened, the eerie feeling of being prey settling deep in her bones. She noticed subtle shifts within their camp, the wary glances exchanged, murmurs too low to catch, the sudden absence of a trusted silence. The betrayal was no longer just rumor. It had found a face masked against the cold desert wind. Her heart hammered in her chest, a relentless drumbeat, echoing the approaching peril. Questions she once pushed aside pressed heavily now. Who could strike from within when trust was already a scarce currency? How far did the reach of their enemies extend, mingled with the unpredictable loyalties born of desperation and fear? Tay's gaze met hers in the firelight, steady, resolute, but shadowed with the same unease. Words were unnecessary. The truth between them burned brighter than any spoken confession. They were hemmed in by forces seen and unseen, caught in a game where every move could mean life or death. Outside, the land remained quiet, as if holding its breath. But Clara knew, beyond the ridge, behind the watchful eyes of the encroaching darkness, the line between friend and foe was blurring into a dangerous gray. The fate of their fragile union, and perhaps the fragile peace of the borderlands, now hinged on a secret stranger, the cloaked figure whose purpose was yet unknown, but whose presence promised betrayal from within. And Clara understood. The truest battles were no longer fought in open fields or under blazing suns, but in whispered shadows, where trust was a weapon wielded with deadly precision. The sharp crack of gunfire shattered the quiet dawn, tearing through the stillness like a vulture's call. Tahe struggled valiantly, clutching his side as the deep wound bled dark and warm against his weathered skin. His breaths came ragged, each one a battle against pain and exhaustion. Clara knelt beside him, panic tightening her chest, her hands trembling as they pressed against the torn fabric of his shirt, trying to stem the flow of blood. The ambush had come without warning. While Tay had gone out to scout, wary of the mounting threats whispered among the dry winds. They had been found by enemies not only driven by old grudges, but poisoned by newer ambitions. Clara saw the harsh reality reflected in Tay's eyes. The fight to protect her came at a bitter price, both physical and spiritual. This was no mere scuffle in the borderlands. It was a declaration that forces were mobilizing against them, intent on breaking the fragile peace their marriage had forced into being. Taina's approach was swift and fierce, flanked by warriors loyal to her brother. Her hands were steady and sure, her fierce gaze never leaving Tay. The scars etched on her face told of battles fought in silence and tears, an unyielding resolve, tempered by blood and loss. She barked sharp orders as her kin hurried to set up a makeshift shelter. Binding Tay's injury with strips torn from faded cloth, the urgency in her voice left no room for doubt. Their enemies were closer than they dared imagine, and a storm was gathering on the horizon. Clara's mind spun with fear and defiance. She had come to understand the tenuous balance that held their lives suspended, but now she had to act, her role transforming from passive partner to unexpected defender. If Tahe was the warrior who carried the tribe's legacy and wounds, she was its heart, beating with newfound courage ignited by desperation. Her hands shook no longer from fear, but from determination, as she prepared to shoulder burdens none had wished for her to bear. Whispers reached their ears of Kale, once a healer turned firebrand, who rallied dissenters with venomous fervor. He branded Clara a threat, a foreign fissure in the tribe's unity, a symbol of a union he sought to unravel, to ignite chaos. Kale's shadow crept longer, sowing seeds of suspicion and fear, not just among Tahe's people, but threatening to reach into the settlers' encampments as well. His web was tightening, and time was slipping through their fingers like the dust that choked the blistered earth. As twilight bled into night, Clara found herself poring over evidence uncovered in the quiet moments between wounds and watches. Letters hidden beneath Tahe's belongings, coded messages whispered in secrecy, hints of a deeper deception clawing at the edges of her understanding. Whoever had woven this marriage, far beyond mere survival, had threads stretched into dark corners neither side dared to explore. Her very presence was not chance. It was carefully orchestrated by unseen hands to serve ambitions cruel and unknowable. The camp hummed with restless energy. Eyes darted, hands gripped weapons tighter, and glances exchanged in furtive warnings. Trust, always a scarce currency in the borderlands, was now precious and fragile as glass. One night, while the camp lay beneath a canvas of cold stars, Clara's vigilance caught a shadow slipping beyond their perimeter, a figure cloaked in darkness, watching, waiting. The silence was a cold blade, cutting through her resolve. This was no accident. Betrayal was closer than she dared admit. Whispers of conspiracies and knives in the dark conspired against them. Tangled with the primal fear that the war ahead was no longer only against external enemies, but born from within. Taina's presence by Clara's side steadied the unbearable weight of suspicion. The fierce woman's quiet strength was a tether to sanity amidst the mounting chaos. Together, they faced the encroaching storm, a war fueled by ancient lores, fractured loyalties, and the cruel manipulation of a fire that threatened to consume all they had fought to protect. Clara's fingers brushed the worn wedding band at her neck, cold against the fervid pulse of unfolding destiny. This fragile union she had entered was shadowed by webs more tangled than she knew. Her role in this saga had transformed irrevocably. Where once she sought safety, now she prepared for battle. One etched not just in flesh and blood, but in trust and betrayal, in survival on razor's edge. As dawn whispered over the fractured horizon, Clara's resolve hardened like desert stone. She was no longer merely the woman who married to survive. She had become a force perched precariously between worlds, one that might tip the scales of peace or destruction. And deep in the dark, concealed among the withered sagebrush, lay the evidence that would shatter illusions. Clara's hands trembled as she pulled forth letters and markings, proof unmistakable that their marriage, their fragile alliance, was but a pawn in a game played by those hungry for power. Forces she could not yet name had orchestrated their fates, weaving deception and danger with cruel precision. Her breath caught in her throat as footsteps echoed beyond campfire light. Eyes burned into the shadows, watching. The game was no longer survival alone. It was war, and Clara stood at its very heart. The weight of unspoken truth pressed upon the small cabin, where Clara and Tahe faced each other, eyes burning with silent demands. The secret Tahe had revealed on their wedding night had not eased. Instead, it twisted deeper into the fragile threads binding their union. Clara's voice was steady, but edged with urgency. "Tell me, Tahe, how far does this threat cut? Who truly stands against us, within your tribe and beyond?" Tahe's gaze darkened, shadows flickering in the firelight. "The wounds in my people run wide. There are those who see us as weaker for this marriage. They fear what it represents, a breach in the old ways. It unravels their hold on power." His hand clenched the rough wooden table between them. Kale, the shaman, sows dissent like seeds on dry earth. His voice grows louder each day, calling for war, for purging those who would challenge his vision. A raw edge touched his words, weighted with personal grief and simmering rage. Clara swallowed hard, feeling the gravity of their predicament sink in like the desert sun's relentless heat. And the colonists? Are they ready to heed reason? Or do they see only betrayal? She lifted her chin. If the settlers reject this peace, then what hope do we have for any future? Tahe rose, pacing the cramped space with restless energy, eyes flashing. Some among the colonists, few but growing, hear the truth behind the bloodshed. I am reaching out to those who still remember what it means to live with honor. But fear clouds many hearts. They see me as an outlaw, a ghost to be hunted, and you, Clara, as a symbol of weakness, or worse, a traitor. The fire cast long shadows as Taina entered quietly, her expression unreadable but hard as stone. She stood near the doorway, watching them with a warrior's keen gaze. Tay's sister, shaped by pain and resilience, carried the weight of her tribe's fractures like armor. "Prepare the camp." Taina's voice was low and purposeful. "War stirs in the west. The council's patience has worn thin." Her eyes locked with Clara's, sharp with warning and challenge. "They see you as a curse, a fracture in the tribe's unity. Tomorrow, the council will decide your fate and ours. Clara's breath caught. The words landed like a blow. Her tenuous place in this world threatened to vanish. Yet beneath the crushing weight of rejection, a spark of defiance flared. If they reject me, they reject what we've fought to build. The chance to end this cycle of blood and fire. I will not beg for acceptance, but I will fight for it. Night draped heavy over the land outside, wrapping the mesa in silence thick enough to suffocate. Around a small fire, Clara spoke to a handful of wary colonists camping nearby, her voice calm but resolute. This path we walk is dangerous, but the alternative is ruin for all. Faces turned with suspicion, but also flickers of hope. War will consume us if we do not bridge this divide now. Her words, hung in the cold air, met with silence and hesitation. Clara knew her efforts were but a spark against the gathering storm of distrust. Yet, even in this fleeting moment, she saw fragile threads of alliance beginning to weave. Back at the tribe's encampment, Taina moved among restless warriors, her presence both comfort and command. The once unified tribe fractured openly, brothers and sisters, divided by old loyalties and fevered promises whispered by Kale's followers. The shaman's words echoed still. Purify by fire, cleanse through blood. Clara confronted Tahe that night, beneath the canopy of stars, the cool desert breeze carrying their whispered confessions. Why did you hide so much from me? The secrets, your fears, they could have been shared, not borne alone. Tahe's voice was a softened growl, vulnerable in its rarity. To protect you from this burden, from the hatred it would bring. He took her hand, calloused and sure. But now you bear it as much as I do. Their shared silence was thick, filled with the ghosts of promises unspoken and futures uncertain. They were two souls tethered by necessity, yet striving for something neither fully understood. A fragile hope stitching them closer in a torn world. But the peace they sought was slipping through fingers stained by suspicion and fear. The following dawn brought an icy reality. The tribal council's rejection of Clara with a chilling ultimatum that silenced the murmurs. His voice cut sharp like a whip crack over the desert dust. Deliver Clara and Tahe to us. Let the insurrection end before it consumes us all. Refuse, and we face war, one that will burn the land from end to end. Eyes blazed, hearts thundered, and the fragile peace shattered like dry earth under the horses' pounding hooves. Clara's pulse raced as the room fell into a tense, suffocating silence. The choice lay heavy. Impossible. Outside, the wind howled a mournful dirge, an echo of the war yet to come. The line was drawn, and no soul would cross it unscathed. Clara's hands moved with steady purpose, tracing the maps and hastily drawn sketches spread across the battered wooden table. The room was thick with the scent of burning sage and the faint musk of worn leather. Outside, the last embers of twilight bled into the darkness, casting long shadows that seemed to stretch and stretch until they melded with the night. Across from her, Tahe sat still, eyes narrowed against the heavy weight of the choices before them. Tanya stood near the window, her keen silhouette etched against the sky, vigilance radiating from her in every silent breath. Their plan was audacious: to gather allies from both the settlers and the moderate factions within the tribe, those who still remembered the peace that seemed so fragile now. None trusted too easily, but all understood that Kale's incendiary messages promised war and perhaps extinction if nothing was done. Clara felt the eyes of the room, both doubtful and desperate. She was no longer the woman who had married to survive. She had become a symbol of a chance that defied centuries of hatred. "Words are not enough," Tay said quietly, voice edged with fatigue. "But they are the only weapons we have before the fighting begins." Clara's gaze met Tana's. The sister's eyes weighed every syllable, measuring the risk of welcoming outsiders into the encampment. "They fear betrayal," Tana murmured, "and yet they fear Kale more. That at least gives us a thread to pull." The dusk thickened as the three moved beyond their shelter, climbing the rocky plateau where a handful of settlers and tribal warriors convened. In wary silence, the cold desert wind carried whispers of the past, old grudges long buried beneath bloodied ground. Clara stepped forward, her voice steady, but laced with the raw edge of urgency. "We stand at the edge of a firestorm," she began, eyes scanning faces lined with hardship and suspicion. "Kale's followers seek to burn down what little we have left. If we wait for the council's final decree, there may be no one left to decide our fate." Her words hung in the chilled air, rippling like a stone cast into a still lake. Murmurs rose, some harsh, some hesitant. An elder settler, hands scarred from years of toil, spoke. "Why should we trust this alliance? We've been burned before by promises from the tribe." His gaze cut like broken glass, but there was also the barest flicker of hope. "We trust because survival demands it," Taya answered, stepping beside Clara. "Because war does not care who falls first. We must find strength in unity, or we shall all perish alone." Tana's voice rose, sharp and commanding. "The tribe is fractured, but not broken. Those with clear eyes see the lies Kale spreads. The future requires that we choose carefully between the flames of hatred or the ashes of peace." That night, beneath a canopy trembling with distant stars, low fires flickered as scattered groups debated, argued, and prayed. Clara walked among them quietly, her presence a bridge as fragile as spun glass. She saw the walls built by generations, the deep trenches of fear and bitterness, but also caught glimpses of weary hearts aching for hope. Yet even as alliances tentatively took form, shadows moved in the peripheries. The air simmered with tension, each quiet moment underscored by suspicion's sharp edge. Clara noticed the cautious glances exchanged between strangers, hands subtly resting on worn weapons, eyes flickering to the darkness beyond the firelight. Back at the encampment, voices grew restless. Whispers spread faster than wildfire, rumors of a traitor lurking among their own. The idea was poison, but with truth buried beneath layers of secrecy, trust splintered like dry bone. Clara's resolve hardened amid the rising storm. She confronted Tahe beneath the sheltered darkness, voices low but fierce. "How deep does this betrayal run?" she demanded, hand gripping his arm, as if anchoring herself against a tempest. "Who walks among us with a blade in shadow, waiting to strike?" Tahe's gaze met hers, steady, haunted. "Closer than we feared. Some have pockets of loyalty to Kale, hidden among the tribe and settlers alike. They want this alliance to fail, to see us crushed by the hatred they feed." Taina joined them silently, her expression grim as she laid her hand over theirs, a vow woven in the quiet night. Their survival depended on vigilance, on strength born not just from muscle, but from unbreakable trust. As the wind howled outside, Clara's thoughts churned restless and sharp. The path they walked was narrow, lined with unseen enemies and fragile allies. Each step, a gamble, each word a plea for peace in a world bent on violence. But like the desert's endless horizon, the battle to come stretched vast and unforgiving. And the night before it promised no rest. Before the first light could crack the horizon, the camp's fragile calm shattered. A whispered murmur swept through the tents, voices tight with alarm. A figure, cloaked and careful, moved unseen through the shadows, delivering a poisoned seed of betrayal. The traitor had revealed their position to Kale, and the war would begin with fire. The dawn's fragile light barely touched the horizon when Clara's gaze caught the distant dust plumes rising beyond the mesas. The sounds of hooves pounding and voices shouting broke the morning stillness, a commotion rippling through the quiet that had barely settled since the last bloody skirmish. Her breath caught as she peered toward the ridge, heart tightening with the knowledge that violence was no longer a distant threat, but a roaring storm on their doorstep. The camp stirred into tense vigilance. Tahe's eyes narrowed, the weight of impending battle etching deeper into his weathered face. He moved with a steady resolve, communicating urgent orders to the warriors under his command. Clara's pulse throbbed in unison with the distant clash, the brutal rhythm of a battle drawing close. The fragile peace they had clung to now shattered into chaos. When the first shots cracked like thunder, the warriors of Tahe answered swiftly. Arrows whistled through the air, mingling with rifle echoes and cries of fury and pain. Clara found herself gripping a worn knife at her side. Not a fighter by nature, but the fire in her veins refused to let her stand idle. Around her, the dust swirled like specters of past tragedies, the dry earth trembling beneath pounding hooves and desperate struggle. Amid the chaos, Clara and Tahe fought side by side, their movements synchronized, a silent testament to the fragile bond that had grown between them, forged through trials and whispered fears. Tahe's scars shone stark against his skin, reminders of battles both fought and survived. Yet in the heat of this bloody dance, Clara glimpsed something deeper, a fierce protectiveness, not just of her person, but of the fragile hope their union represented. The clash was brutal, furious, and raw. Faces blurred into a tempest of sweat, dust, and rage. Men and warriors alike fell, the bitter cries of loss piercing the cacophony. Clara's chest heaved as she dodged a bullet's deadly thud and struggled to steady Tahe when he parried a blade with grim determination. Every strike, every desperate shout brought the bitter cost of a war born from hatred and misunderstanding. But this fight was no mere battle. It was a crucible, testing the strength of their union and the unity of those who dared to dream beyond old wounds. Clara could feel the heat of burning pride and the cold edge of fear entwined in the chaos around her. The ground beneath their feet was stained not only with blood, but with the fragile hope of coexistence, struggling to remain alive. Amid the swirling fury, a voice cut through the turmoil, an ancient, angry war cry, answering those of the settler fighters. The warriors loyal to Kale surged forward in violent waves, their hate-fueled shouts echoing against the canyon walls. The air was thick with powder smoke, burning flesh, and the acrid scent of fear. Clara's gaze searched desperately for Tahe among the throng as he plunged into the heart of the fighting. The battle raged toward its breaking point when Tahe faced Kale himself, a man whose eyes burned with fanatic fire and whose voice dripped venomous words, seething with promises of blood and cleansing fire. Clara's heart lurched as the two men stood locked in fierce combat, blades clashing, bodies straining under the weight of years of hatred. Tay's every movement was a dance against death, every breath a prayer for their future. But amid the chaos, Clara's tumult was interrupted by rough hands that seized her from behind. The world narrowed into a violent blur as she was dragged away from the battle. The cries of conflict fading into the suffocating silence of captivity. Her struggles were met with cold determination. She was to be used as a pawn, a bargaining chip between warring factions. Bound and trembling, Clara felt the crushing weight of betrayal settle over her like a suffocating shroud. The fragile hope woven through her union with Tay seemed to unravel, yet even in the dark grasp of captivity, her spirit flared with a fierce determination not to surrender. Outside, the dust of battle settled slowly, shadows stretching long across the broken land. The roar of the conflict faded, only to leave a silence thick with the promise of reckoning. Tay's fate hung in the balance, locked in combat with an enemy born of twisted loyalties and burning hatred. And Clara, caught in the unforgiving tide of war, became the stake on which the fragile future of two worlds would be decided. As the sun dipped beneath the horizon, the night swallowed her cries and the distant echo of swords. Somewhere under the cold gaze of unforgiving stars, the war was far from over. And Clara's fate, now bound and uncertain, would ignite the next desperate chapter of their story. The dawn broke softly over the scarred land where the last battle had raged, casting pale gold light upon a horizon heavy with the scent of smoke and sorrow. Clara stood at the edge of the settlement, her breath steady, but her heart pounding with the weight of everything that had come before. The war cry of Kale was silenced now, but the echoes of his hatred still clung to the bones of the earth beneath her feet. Inside the burned-out council tent, the tribal elders gathered, their faces etched by years of hardship and loss. Tahe stood among them, his stance proud, yet worn, a warrior tempered by fire and loss. Across from him sat the remaining voices of dissent, now bowed in grudging respect. The shaman Kale lay defeated, his vision shattered, not by blade alone, but by the undeniable truth spoken from Tahe's steady lips, the truth of a union that could no longer be denied. With calm resolve, Tahe addressed the assembly. "We have borne too long the weight of old grudges and broken trust. The land thirsts not for blood, but for peace. This union, mine and Clara's, is the first step toward healing, not just for my people or the settlers, but for all who call this harsh land home." A murmur passed through the elders. Taina, standing beside her brother, caught Clara's hand in a silent vow of solidarity. Her sharp eyes softened with the relief of a battle finally ended, not merely with swords, but with the courage to break centuries of silence. Outside, Clara's hands trembled as she held freedom once seized from the shadows of captivity. The binds that had held her were gone, but the scars remained, reminders of the price paid. Yet in those chains broken, Clara found a new strength, tempered by the brutal journey that had led her here. Her voice, once uncertain, now carried the weight of a woman transformed, one who had fought not just to survive, but to inspire change. Together, Tahe and Clara stepped beyond the council's circle, stepping into a future uncertain but ripe with possibility. Their marriage, born of necessity, now bloomed into something more profound, a symbol of hope among lands divided by fear and hatred. Around their joined hands, the embers of old fires cooled, replaced by cautious flames of unity flickering in tentative alliances forged that night. Colonists and Apache warriors stood side by side, wary but willing, sharing stories around fires that no longer burned with the threat of destruction, but with the promise of tomorrow. Clara gazed across the vast expanse of the borderlands, the rugged mountains standing silent witness to the fragile peace they had carved from chaos. "We carry the past with us," she whispered, "but we do not have to be prisoners to it." Tahe nodded, his voice a low vow. "The scars will remain, but so will the lessons. Our children will know a land where fear no longer governs, where two worlds embrace instead of clash." The sun climbed higher, spilling warmth across the fractured land, as animals stirred and the wind carried fresh scents of sage and possibility. Among the settlers, whispers of hope began to weave through camps, battered by years of war. And within the tribe, voices once filled with rage shifted to ones that dared dream of peace. In the quiet moments that followed, Clara and Tahe found solace beneath a sky now unburdened by war's storm. They spoke softly of dreams, of a family to raise, of fields to tend, of songs to teach their children in, a tongue that spoke of unity rather than division. "Will they trust us?" Clara asked, a tremor of doubt still lingering in her tone. "They must," Tahe replied gently, tightening his grip. "We will be the path they choose to follow. If not, our story ends here, but I believe it will not." And as the day unfolded, The land around them seemed to breathe anew. Where once lay ashes, hope took root. Where once shadows deepened, light began to stretch long fingers, promising a dawn born not just of survival, but of rebirth. The journey had been one of blood and fire, of betrayal and courage, but in the end, it was a story of hearts intertwined, of a woman and a warrior who dared to hope against the odds, forging peace where once only suspicion had reigned. Together, Clara and Tahe turned toward the vast horizon, faces illuminated by the rising sun and the promise it bore. The harsh frontier would never be gentle, but beneath their footsteps now lay a path forged by love and defiance. A path toward a future where two worlds finally met, not as enemies, but as one. The land still whispered its ancient truths, but in that whispered wind, Clara heard a new song, the song of hope born from the fiercest fires, and a promise kept between souls who refused to be broken. Their story was no longer one of survival alone. It was a legacy, and it had just begun.